Hey guys, welcome back to another week of the Get to Know Me series. For being here today, That's right. It's another week of Get to Know Me, brought to you by the Salvation Army here in Berwick, PA. And boy, I am so excited about this week's episode. Today's guest, it's easy to say, has had a fingerprint on my entire family's life at one point. And I bet you she's had a fingerprint on yours as well. She is toy designer extraordinaire, Stefanie Eskander, and take a little bit of a peek at what she's been up to. There's some familiar sights there, and we welcome Stefanie on the show. Stefanie, thank you so much for joining us.
I am so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I got to tell you, that room behind you right now, just be my wife and I's heaven right there. We would never be leaving that room. It looks amazing. So Stefanie, we're going to get into kind of your career and how you got there and all the amazing things. We saw some of the examples of what you've worked on. I kind of want to quickly hit on maybe how you and I connected. And it was through a love of something very dear to me that just happens to be... there we go.
Oh my gosh, look at those guys.
Look at these, and these are, for those of you that don't know, and those of you that know me, know, huge wrestling guy, and these are Tonka wrestling buddies from the early 90s, and I was very blessed to be on WWE television, and one of my first things I did was grab this guy, put him behind me, and then when I was done, write Stefanie, and I was able to say thank you for everything. So again, I say thank you, Stefanie, for that.
Well, you're very welcome. It was a really fun project that lasted a couple of years, and I was sorry when it ended.
Yeah, it's such a big part of my childhood, even though ironically I never owned one as a child. But I do now. And so, Stefanie, toy designer, I kind of was looking over your credentials. You've worked at Mattel, you've worked at Tonka, you have worked at Spin Masters, you've worked Hasbro,
Fisher-Price,
Toys R Us,
Madam Alexander Doll Company.
So we can pretty much say there's less companies that you haven't worked for than it is you have.
And then there's, roughly half my career, maybe a little bit less, I was freelancing.
Okay.
And during those years, which is I'm still freelancing now, I worked for almost every other company that I didn't work for full time. So I've worked with just about everybody.
Well, and that's why I say your fingerprint is probably felt through so many people's lives. Well, toy designer sounds pretty kind of big and vague. Could you give us kind of a snapshot on what a toy designer actually does?
Well, it's really a good question because I think it kind of means a little bit something different for different people. So my basic definition of toy designer is it's the person who comes up with the aesthetics of a toy. We're not engineers. we're not necessarily sculptors. We're not necessarily inventors or engineers or mechanisms people, although we might be. So the aesthetics of a toy, the drawing of it, creation, but also within that, many people who are toy designers are also inventors, or also might be clever with sculpting or model making and things like that. So it's really a pretty broad field. Not every designer can draw. Some designers just know how to direct other people to do their drawing for
Right.
them. Not every designer is really good with coming up with ideas, but some designers are really good with coming up with ideas, but then they may not be really good with executing them. So it's really pretty broad. I think in my career, I've been fairly blessed that I've been able to do a lot of different things. And because I was able to draw, and I'm not saying I'm a genius artist, but in the toy field, I am considered a pretty, decent artist that way. I've been blessed enough to do all kinds of different things that are related, that maybe not everybody has the skills, like designing graphics for toys and play sets, designing fabric patterns for dolls' dresses. And that kind of is how I got into doing the Wrestling Buddies. And I don't know if you want to talk about that right now, or you want to segue into that. But since you were talking about wrestling, that drawing skill was what got me that particular assignment.
Well, yeah, we'll come back. I want to definitely hit on the Wrestling Buddies. We'll come back. I know a lot of people do. It's been a kind of a renaissance, renewed interest. But I do want, by the way, I would call you a brilliant artist for sure. But I do want to just kind of hit on quickly, how did this come about in your life? When did you realize that you could draw? Maybe you had a passion for drawing. What was that journey like?
I could always draw. Drawing was just something that I did well from the time I was a little tiny girl. Always drawing, always sketching. I have some old sketchbooks that I did when I was 10 years old, 11 years old. I mean, I was no prodigy, but I was a decent artist. And I always was known as the kid, say in grade school and then in junior high and high school. I was the one that designed all the posters when somebody was running for office. I was the one that the school secretary would call in when it was a teacher's birthday, and they'd want me to design a birthday card or, do all the publicity. My very first, I guess you call it, job was I designed the graduation program for my grade school graduation. So, and I still have a copy of that drawing I did of the school. And so, it was just something I always did. And I have to say that I was blessed with talents, from the time I was little. It was just nothing that I did to deserve it, but I just feel like I was blessed with talents in music. I was athletic as a child. There were a lot of things. And at some point I had to make a decision, and I would guess this was probably maybe junior high, what I was going to focus on. And I decided that the thing I wanted to focus on was art. And the reason that I did that was I'd taken piano lessons for a lot of years. I was not a brilliant pianist, but I stuck with it, right? I took lessons. The thing that made me crazy about playing music was that I was always playing someone else's compositions, right?
Yeah.
We weren't learning about composition or improvisation. I was learning to play Chopin and Mozart.
Right.
And to me, that wasn't very creative. And so I chose art because it was something where I could use my imagination and I could draw whatever I wanted to draw and learn that skill. And I wasn't copying some other artist. I was doing my own thing. And so that's kind of the trajectory. So when I went to college, I majored in art. Particularly, I got my BFA in illustration because I wanted to illustrate for children. And so my specialty back in college was children's illustration. I thought I wanted to illustrate children's books. And my career took another trajectory.
Sort of.
Sort
Because
of.
yeah, because you're still designing for children
I am.
in a big way. Well, so how did you enter? This trajectory went from children's books in school, and how did you get into the design business? Obviously, you've been doing it for many years, but that obviously means you started very young. So how did you project into that? Yeah, I thought you'd
Very
like that.
good. That's really an interesting story because I didn't know anything about the toy industry. I mean, I didn't know that it exists. Of course, I knew in a more global way
Right. You
because
knew
somebody,
toys existed. Yeah.
right. But what didn't occur to me, actually started my career as an advertising illustrator, and I was working for a very large advertising agency in Los Angeles. My first job out of college. I'd worked for a small ad agency in my college town part-time while I was finishing up, and I was doing advertising art, but I had always kind of specialized in kids work. And so when I was working at my ad agency, we had some accounts. We had Taco Bell, for example. That was one of our big accounts. And I was a storyboard and what they call a comp illustrator. So I was doing preliminary artwork for commercials and for print media. And I kind of loved doing the Taco Bell stuff because it often involved kids. And about the same time, I started illustrating for children's magazines, which suited me because each illustration could be something, just a few pages. It wasn't a book, right? It was
Right.
a project that I could get done in a week or two, and it would be done, and I could have a lot of fun with it. So I worked as an advertising illustrator for years, and then I left my full-time job when I had my first child, and I began to freelance. So we were living in Hollywood, and I was freelancing for a lot of the big ad agencies, and I picked up some freelance work for Mattel's advertising agency. So I was doing storyboard work for Masters of the Universe and See and Say and Barbie. And then I was working for Tomy Toys ad agency, and I was doing storyboard work for Get Along Gang and Kimberly Dolls. And even though I was doing other kinds of print and storyboard work, I really enjoyed the toy work. And then at the end of 1984, I heard that Mattel was going to have a job fair. And I had a pretty decent portfolio of children's type artwork. I had already done a line of puzzles for a small toy company, and I'd done some doll box illustration because I still considered myself an illustrator rather than a toy designer. I'd never really, other than the puzzles, I'd never really designed product. And so I went to the job fair and they hired me. I mean,
Wow. Yes.
so I started at Mattel, and they gave me the choice: did I want to work in their package design department or their product design? And package design was kind of what my background was, more graphic design, illustration, but product design sounded a lot more fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I didn't have any experience, but I said I'd like to do product design. And so that's what I did. That's when I was at Mattel for the first time. I actually worked there twice. And when I worked on Popples and Lady Lovely Lux and Rainbow Bright. So that was kind of how, and so I just jumped right into it and learned everything I could learn and discovered that I actually was pretty good at it.
Wow. And do you think you chose the product design as opposed to the packaging design because you wanted a challenge, that you wanted to step outside of your comfort zone? Was that kind of
Yes.
scary doing that?
Yes, yeah, it really was. I was really nervous about it because I knew that there were a lot of people there who were really experienced, and I felt confident in my art skills, that I had the skills to create the cute drawings, the faces and things. But as far as designing actual product and learning about plastics and molding, I was really nervous about that. And it was one of those things that I learned on the job. There's some things that you can learn on the job, and there's other things that it's better if you have those skills already, because I think aesthetics, I talked about how a designer is designing the aesthetics of the toy, or directing it. You may be asking somebody else to do that drawing for you, but you're sharing your vision to help create that and bring that to fruition. But, learning how to do the technical things was something that I learned on the job. And the being able to draw a cute face, that was something that I didn't learn on the job. That was something that I kind of had to have innately, have had developed my whole life up to that point. For me, that was really important to be able to draw well. And like I said, not every designer has the same skill level and the same interest. But I've learned, at least when I was working full time, I tended to gravitate toward the best artists as friendships developed.
Yeah.
And when I was at Hasbro, I was at Hasbro from 1986 to the very end of 1989, and so four years.
Some big
And
years there too.
4 big years.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful, oh my gosh, the designers at Hasbro were just amazing. And the guys that were in the G.I. Joe group or the Transformers group, they were amazing artists. You've looked at Ron Rudat, who was prominent in designing the wrestling toys, the wrestling action figures. Ron was a colleague and just an amazing artist in his own right. And these were the kind of these were my people, the guys who went to Art Center to learn how to be automotive designers, and they ended up doing Hot Wheels or Transformers, and their art skills were just unparalleled.
And it sounds like you've mentioned a few times about people's different skills within toy design and kind of discovering them and then working together. So would you say to someone looking to get into toy design that it's very important to learn teamwork skills and people skills and how to communicate with each other?
Right. I don't like to give career advice because everybody's career path is different. But I do sometimes, I posted recently about advantages and disadvantages of, say, working full time for a toy company and then freelancing. Yeah. And one of the things that I do recommend is, if a person wants to be a toy designer, the best way to do it is to actually work for a toy company. There are paths, and especially now with technology, 3D design and things like that, there probably are paths that young people who are interested in toy design can pursue, that they can, and there are also people who make their own toys, who have them 3D printed. Sometimes they do it themselves. Sometimes it's done in China, limited. There are options, but I'm talking about the mainstream toy industry, working for the different toy companies. That's the best way to learn everything you need to learn, because there's so much more involved than just making a cute drawing or designing a character, designing an action figure, understanding how plastics are molded, understanding how things are, what materials are used, understanding about safety. I always say that the number one concern that toy designers should have is to make sure that whatever you are creating is safe for children to play with.
Absolutely.
And my focus is always on children's playthings, not adult collectibles. And that's a whole other field. And there's a lot of wonderful things being done with adult collectibles, but they don't have to worry so much about safety and age appropriateness and things like that, because they're creating for adults. But I'm primarily interested in designing for children. And so you always have to make sure that everything that you design uses safe materials, doesn't have any issues like toxicity, flammability, small parts, choking. They have to be reliable. They can't shatter, all of these things. And you don't learn those just kind of through osmosis. You'll learn them through experience. And the best way to get that experience, I think, is through working for a toy company. So, I spent many years working for various toy companies, trying to learn and suck every bit of information I could, of how things are made and how best to make them. And it made me a better designer. And then during the freelance years, which were also quite a few years, I was able to take that knowledge and kind of translate it into a very successful freelance career, and I'm still freelancing today. A lot of my colleagues have retired, and I don't have any plans to retire.
And it's kind of what you're saying is kind of in any field. We've had so many people kind of on here, whether it be broadcasting, talking about the camera guy's job, the lighting guy's job, whether it be video game designers we've had on here. You've got to know storyboard artists that we had. You've got to know the technical team, the cast, and so everybody we've had, even gentleman we just had on with NASA, as an engineer, working with everybody, knowing everybody's jobs. It's important to put your hands in as much as you can, to learn as much as you can.
And that reminded me of something. I mentioned earlier that I started my career as a storyboard artist. I did that for 10 years, working in advertising, and it's amazing. I'm working on a job now. I can't tell you what it is.
No.
But I'll tell you that my many years of experience in advertising has made a world of difference in doing this particular job, even though it's not an advertising job. Do you know what I mean?
It's absolutely.
Experiences you got, not just in your field, but other experiences that you bring in. And as an artist, I've been able to not just design the toys, but as I mentioned before, designing the graphic design for the labels that go on a toy, designing the fabric art, kind of being able to do the whole package. I think as a freelancer now, my clients appreciate the fact that they can come to me and I can do, if they need me to, I can do all of those other things. In addition to just styling or doing the aesthetics of a toy. But I can also follow it through production by creating a lot of the final details that makes their jobs easier, because they don't have to go and hire somebody else to do that.
Right. And that's work life. That's adult life,
right.
Or as the kids say now, #adulting. I
don't do that very well.
No. I'm sitting next to a stack of toys myself. So, and I'm not even in the industry, so there, my kids love it though. So with all of these experiences that you had, and kids watching this are going to say, oh, wow, she got to work in the toy industry and play with toys and see toys made before anybody else. There had to have been some struggles along the way. Could maybe you share some of the, hardships that you ran into, the obstacles you ran into?
That's a really good question. I think as a product designer, and I'm sure this is true in many fields, not just toys, and especially if you're working for larger companies, a lot of the products that you work on, designs that you work on, are never produced. There's a variety of reasons. You might work for a year on a toy line, and it gets canceled at the last minute because of whatever reason. There's, some finance guy that says the financials aren't adding up. And so the large toy companies can absorb these losses of spending 6 months developing a toy line only to have it canceled, or putting a toy line on the market, and then you're always working a year and a half ahead of time. Toys do not come up. It's not quick. We're not talking a couple of months. We're talking many, many months, especially plastic toys. Soft toys has a faster turnaround because it's much easier to get fabric and sew something quickly than it is to mold a plastic toy.
Right.
So, the disappointment of having your hard work never be seen, that's challenging. And I've had, many, many more toys that I've designed were never produced than were actually produced. So that's been a hard thing. So you have to have thick skin. You can't cry about it, moan about it, be sad. You just move on. And honestly, because we're working so far in advance, by the time that product is canceled, you're on to other things, and there's just no time to mourn or be sad or take it personally. So I think that's probably the hardest thing, and we don't get credit. Designers don't get credit. It's not like movies. My sons are in the film industry, And my daughter, actually my younger daughter, is getting into the film industry.
Oh, wonderful.
And, they've got their IMDb profiles and, you see all their stuff and the movie is done and the credits are rolling and their names are there. Yeah. Toy designers don't get recognition. And so we work anonymously. And until social media, almost nobody knew what I did. People knew that I designed toys, but they had no idea what I was doing. And so, if you want credit, if you're used to having your name on stuff, toy design isn't for you, because for the most part, especially mainstream toys, you don't get credit. But that's okay, because that's just the way that industry is. When you buy that car, it doesn't have the signatures of all the men and women who designed and engineered that car, right? You don't expect to know. You'd probably be surprised to know that maybe a neighbor was involved in the development of some kind of technology. It's important to know that it's not a career for people who like a spotlight. And I think today with social media, I think young people are kind of growing up expecting to get credit for stuff. They have their faces on their social media account. They're taking selfies. They're posting their own stuff. Their name is out there. And it seems alien to not be known by the work that you do. But much of product design, every type, if you're a furniture designer or you're an industrial designer or an architect, unless you're at the top of that game and you've got a recognizable name, Michael Graves or, Frank Lloyd Wright, nobody knows the people who are laboring hard behind the scenes to do those things. So but I'm used to that. That's all I've ever known. And so when I decided to open up my my toy Instagram account, it was really strange to me to put myself out there, because I wasn't used to that. I didn't like to get too much credit for stuff. I'm not a shy person, but I'm also not a braggy person. So, I'm not the kind of person that really expects it. So I guess those are kind of negatives, but they're not really, it's just, it makes me happy to do that and to make a difference. One of the stories that I've told, and I have a book that you showed at the beginning.
Yeah, which the link will be in the description for you to go ahead and see more of that.
I wrote a book about my career, and one of the stories that I share was one of the first times that I ever actually encountered somebody who had a toy that I designed. And I had just gotten to Tonka. So I had only been in the toy industry for 5 or 6 years. I was at the airport, and at that time I was being relocated from Rhode Island, where Hasbro was, to Minneapolis, where Tonka was. And so I was, every other weekend I'd fly home to Rhode Island, where my husband was getting our house ready to sell and taking care of the kids and doing all that. And I was at the airport, and I saw a lady and a little girl, and the little girl was holding one of the dolls that I had designed, called Baby Dolly Surprise, which was a doll that I did for Play School, Hasbro Play School division. And I normally don't draw attention to myself, but I went up to the mom and I told her that I had designed that doll. And she just said, "Oh my gosh, my daughter loves that doll. She takes it everywhere she goes. She drags it, she drags it on the plane. She sleeps with it. It means the world to her." And, that was to me, that was the ultimate, was seeing a child loving a toy that I had designed. And that's what made it all worthwhile. I didn't care that nobody knew that I had designed that doll. That wasn't what was important. What was important was that something that I created had made a difference in a child's life. And of course, now that there's social media, I'm hearing from people every day who loved a toy or 2 or 10 that I designed, and it meant something to them. And that, to me, that's the ultimate reward of being a toy designer.
Yeah, goosebumps when you said about that with the little girl. And I was literally just thinking, I showed these. I did not carry these in today. My 9-year-old Jake, who off air, Stephanie spent some great time with him, and he was through the moon. And he carried these in, and along the way it was, all right, Hulk, I'm gonna slam you down when we get upstairs, and Ted, you're gonna get the elbow. And it just made my heart full. And so it's something so tangible you can put your hands on. Well, Stefanie, believe it or not, we've already flown through 30 minutes. Any chance you have a few more minutes we could come back for a part 2 here
Sure.
and hit some of the fun stuff? I know I'm putting you on the spot. Well,
Absolutely.
right. Well, I'm going to put Stefanie's Instagram, as you see it right there on the screen, and I'm going to put her website on in the description. Go to it and check out some of the stuff that she did, and maybe even order a book or a signed print that you can find there. And come back next week as we have some fun stories about what it's like in the toy industry. So until next week, as we always say, stay close to Jesus. We love you. Talk to you next week.